Okay, welcome back to Advanced Composition. Professor Kent Lee. We're going to look at various style issues in this section, style and grammar issues, and we're going to start with modal verbs. So just to clarify, some people still have problems with modal verbs. They work differently in English than in East Asian languages, and there's some really interesting differences which cause difficulties for East Asian students. So take a look at these examples on this slide. What's the difference between 1 and 2 and between 3 and 4? What do these modals actually mean in different contexts? What do you think? All right, what is should? What's the meaning of should? It's not quite obligation or necessity. It's not the same as must. Who would say the online banking system should be easier to use or it must be easier to use? Who would say which one? Well, must is more like an obligation. So it would be somebody in authority, somebody who is in position, maybe the bank president. He's really angry and he's heard a lot of complaints and he tells the IT department, the system must be easier. So it must, it's basically giving a command. Must is obligation, necessity in the sense of obligation. And actually a word for this in logic is a deontic, and so linguists call this a deontic modal. It means obligation or necessity, obligation. Should is kind of maybe more normal. It's something that maybe bank employees would say, customers would say, the customers get feedback and complaints. It should be easier to use. It should be made easier. So should is said because why? It's a strong expectation or strong advice. It's a strong statement of advice or expectation. The customers are giving a strong suggestion. It should be easier. We spend too much time trying to work with it. Or expectation, like I expect the banking to not take 2 hours to do. It should take just, 10 minutes to do some simple stuff like this, like paying my bills. It shouldn't take so long. Strong expectation. If I say to you, you must do your homework, it's kind of like commanding. Now I'm going to give you a strong recommendation. You should do your homework in time. You should do it. Or if it's late, you should have done it. You should have done it. I am talking about a strong expectation or advice. You should have done it. Strong expectation. Suggestion. The lab should be cleaned up, must be cleaned up. Well, should be cleaned up. Probably most people would say should be cleaned up. It's like your expectation around here. Your lab mates say it should be cleaned up when you leave. But the professor who runs the lab, the boss, says it must be cleaned up. It's more like he's angry and he's giving an order. It must be cleaned up. Normally he might say it should be cleaned up, but if he's upset, he's going to give an order. It must be cleaned up. It sounds stronger. Now, as we'll see in a minute, you probably know must has another meaning, which we'll see soon. But let's look at could. What's the meaning of could in number 1? Is it present or past tense? What's the default meaning of could? Okay, we could do the experiment if we had funding. Is it past or present or future? It's kind of future, or it's kind of present future. It's a conditional, it's hypothetical. It's not past. The default reading, assuming there's not really something in the context that affects it, the default or basic reading would be, we could do the experiment in the future if we had the funding. It's conditional or hypothetical. That's the default meaning of could. You might have been taught it's the past of can, and that's kind of true, and sometimes it is. Historically, it developed that way as a past tense of can, but in modern English, the default meaning of could is hypothetical or conditional, which means kind of present, future, present or future, more likely future. In the future, we could do the experiment. Right now, we could do the experiment if we had the funding, but right now we're not sure if we've got the money for this. So if you want a past reading, if you want to say that you actually did it, you can just say we performed the experiment. We did the experiment, but more academic style. We conducted the experiment. We were able to do the experiment if you need to emphasize ability. We had some problems, but we were able to do the experiment. We successfully performed the experiment. Now, where it can have a past meaning, or can have a past meaning, is if there's something in the context that clearly makes it past. A time expression in the context, or a negative. When I was young, I could lift 20 kilograms, but now I'm out of shape. Or I couldn't lift a 20-kilogram bag of, concrete mix or something like that. So in certain contexts, it can mean past tense, but otherwise the default meaning of could is conditional, future, non-past anyway. Now let's look at these sentences. What's the difference in these sentences? Think for a while about these. What's the difference between especially, could, might, may? What's the difference? Okay, let's get rid of the first one. Must, he must be lying. So must is kind of like necessity. You must make the banking system easier. You must clean the lab, expressing necessity. But in this case, this is kind of it's almost like a metaphorical meaning of must. It's not like necessity, but this is the necessary explanation. Things are looking kind of weird. I'm thinking, by the way, of my president, of course, obviously. So this is the necessary explanation for what's going on. And this is what's called inferred probability. So inferred probability is the explanation here. I'm inferring, and I'm very certain that he's lying, because that's the only explanation for what's going on. He must be lying. Certain, very certain that he's lying. Now, what's the difference between could, might, and may? So could is kind of, well, think about it. It's from can. So what does that mean? He can lie. It means he has the ability to lie. But then thinking hypothetically, you're not totally sure he could be lying, but he's able to. So in other words, could, the nuance is really focused on the person's ability. He's lied before, or it's normal and natural for him to lie. So based on experience or knowledge of the person, it's within his ability or his character. So you're focusing more on the person. It's a slight nuance. Now, sometimes there's not a big difference between like 2 and 3 and 4, not a big difference, but there's a nuance here. 2, he could be lying because you're assessing the person or ability or character or what's normal for that person. He could be lying because he can lie. He could be lying. May or might, and of course, as you probably taught, I think might is a little less certain than may. But so that's the difference. But how are these different from can, could? Might and may look more at the situation. The situation is suspicious. So 2, it's more like the person is suspicious. 3 and 4 is more like the situation is suspicious. Things, so you're inferring, so it's external to the person, the situation or circumstances or what's happening. Things look funny here. The situation looks funny. He might be maybe lying. And that's the difference here. Many times it's only a slight nuance, but it's a little nuance that English expresses, which as far as I know is not quite expressed in East Asian languages like this. So that's why these are difficult for you. Okay, next I want you to look at page 153, I think section 10.5, I believe. Yeah, cohesion, okay. I want you to look at the use of the pronouns in 10.5.1. It's called reformulation expressions. And what do you think sounds better? Which examples, which possibilities sound better? Okay, in this case, in A, is it clear? It also provides, it will result in. Is it clear? No. And I see East Asian writers doing this. What does it refer to? Is it referring to a specific object or thing in the preceding context? No. It's referring to an idea. It's referring to the content of a clause or sentence or idea before it. So it's not referring to just an object, but an idea. So a better pronoun would be this, which is what we call more of a discourse pronoun. So it is a personal pronoun. It's referring to like a person, like he, she, or a thing like it. Personal pronoun refers to it, but the function of this will result is more of a discourse pronoun. So this refers to the preceding idea or clause or sentence. And you can show this by saying this will result, or you can expand it with some kind of a noun, whatever noun fits in the context. This expansion. Now D and E and F get to be a little bit wordy, and those are a little unnatural. It's kind of unnecessary. You could say this expansion or just this. And in different contexts, this whatever, this fact or just this. This idea or this finding or result, or just this shows that, blah, blah, blah. This finding shows that such and such is the case, or just this shows that such is the case. And so the same is true, for example, in the exercises down below at the bottom of page 154. While this or this situation or this circumstance, to this, you can say this result, this outcome. Number 3, this or this finding, this result. And 4, this or this phenomenon, this finding or something like that. Next, you have in 10.5.2 descriptive with phrases. What do you think of these sentences? Pause for a minute and think. Okay, the who had, it's a little wordy in academic English style. You can just say with. Some people say with, but usually with in American English, with. We identified patients with mild symptoms of hypertension, where you're really not intending to put emphasis on possession, the idea of possessing, or it's more like a descriptive phrase, patients with mild symptoms. That flows better. 2, East Asian students often use relative clauses with have. I would say, instead of say that have, just with have as a main verb. That's kind of ironic, huh? Okay. So relative clauses with have as the main verb. That sounds better. So some other options for a kind of, so this section is called cohesion. So it means coherence is like the flow of ideas, and cohesion is like the flow of words. And so you see a word in the text, can you relate it to what it's referring to, especially if it's referring to the same noun before in the text? If you say it, what is it referring to? That, what's that referring to? Or the clause before. And so in some kinds of writing, it might be more common to use this, might be more common to use pronouns. Sometimes it's better to use, instead of pronouns, repeating the noun again. Like in science contexts where you're talking about a lot of things and the writing style is really dense, and if you say this, what this, the silicon, the boron crystal, this thingy, that thing, you're talking about a lot of different materials and objects in your experiment. So you might just repeat the nouns. Or sometimes you rephrase it with a different phrase, especially in more humanities writing, it's kind of better flow. Like in the examples you see there. Or synonyms sometimes. Sometimes it's hard to find synonyms for technical terms. But anyway, you can read the rest of that. Look at this whole section, some tips for making your writing a little bit clearer and better. The next time we're going to look at some other aspects of grammar and style. So these videos are going to be a little short, perhaps, some of them, so you can focus on your assignments. So good luck. See you later.